Thanks, Dan. I'm nervous. I'm just going to put that out there. I might swear a little bit. I'm nervous because I was here for the session after morning tea. Is it okay if I swear a little bit? Yeah. Thank you. Are there any introverts in the room? It's a bit hard to see. A couple of people doing these ones. Bullshit. Introverts don't put up their hands. It's the extroverts who just want to be seen who do that. I'm a bit nervous because I came here after morning tea and I listened to Phil DeBella speak and I listened to the speaker following him, who is my sister. And if there's a hard act to follow, it's lunch, because everyone sort of carbs up and gets a little bit sleepy. But I've never followed my sister up on stage before, and I'm so proud to do that. And I think that she absolutely nailed it. If you didn't see her speech, you missed out. And for those of you who did, there's a whole heap of gold in there. So I'd like to say, I'm not sure if we did an acknowledgement of country before we began, but I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which we're meeting this afternoon and sharing this wisdom and knowledge, the Turrbal people, to their elders, past, present and emerging. I'm going to talk a little bit about stories as we go today, and I think I'm going to be talking about culture as well, and there is no culture that is more interesting and relevant to us as a country right now than our Indigenous culture. I work for a company called Pragmatic Thinking. We are Australia's leading behaviour and motivation strategy company. We may be Australia's only behaviour and motivation strategy company. There's often a need to define or describe what it is we do, but I think in terms of business at the moment, culture is one of the most discussed and probably least understood topics. And I think it's really important for us to be doing that. I think it's important for us to be looking in business at our behaviour and also what it takes to motivate your team. I'm really grateful to be here, and I'm really grateful that you took the time to be here this afternoon as well. I believe that time is our greatest resource. It's probably one of our it's probably the biggest liability we have as well, because we treat it like we have it, and we're going to have it for longer than we can actually know that we do. So thank you for being here this afternoon to listen to me talk about what it is to build a transformational culture in your workplace. I'd like to acknowledge you for the work that you do. I know that people here are here because you want to improve your workplace. You want to be a better leader. You want to be a better manager. You want to be a better business owner, or perhaps you want to be just better at your job. And I think that's worthy. So thank you, and thank you to Tanda for putting on an awesome event. My title is a culture strategist, which is sometimes also needs a bit of explaining. Essentially, is anyone here a people watcher who loves just to kind of sit around and watch what people do? Yeah, me too. It's not in a weird way. I get paid to do it, actually, which also sounds a bit weird. But I've been fascinated by what people do, why people do what they do, and how they do it for a long time throughout school. And then at university, I went and studied philosophy and psychology. And I've always been fascinated by what people do. And I think, now I have this privilege to go into workplaces and help leaders and help founders and help people who are involved in helping other people in their organisation, help them understand why we do what we do. And it's an absolute privilege. We at Pragmatic Thinking had, speaking of privilege, an opportunity and a genuine privilege to visit Arnhem Land about 3 weeks ago now, almost a month ago. We flew up to Darwin and we hopped in a small plane and flew about an hour into West Arnhem Land. And I had the opportunity to sit in the dirt, in the sand, with this gentleman who is explaining his culture with his hand and a few lines in the sand. And he's explaining a culture that is over 60,000 years old. It's this planet's oldest surviving, living, continuous culture. How do you... And I'm here to talk about company culture. How do you talk about culture? How do you understand and define culture? It's really hard, and I'm no expert. People talk about the 10,000 hours. I reckon I've done 10,000 hours, but I would certainly not consider myself a master nor an expert in what I do, because every time I learn something about culture, whether it be an Indigenous culture, whether it be a culture in a workplace, I always always. I'm humbled by the fact that the more I learn, the more there is to learn. So I stand here today to share some insights and perhaps summarize a little bit about what I've learned, but I also acknowledge that this is such an evolution. And it's constantly changing, it's constantly growing, as we are as human beings. But Graham from Particle, he gave us an insight to his culture, an incredibly complex, complicated, diverse and rich culture. And he did it with his hand in the sand and a few lines. Here he is describing and explaining his family and how men and women relate growing up in his culture. It was fascinating to me, and it opened up so many more questions than were ever going to be answered in the hour that we spent listening to his stories. But there is something that I learned from Graham and how he told his stories, and that is that you can take something really complicated and complex like culture. The best way to describe it, the best way to share it is through stories. And sometimes it's as simple as a line in the sand. I'm going to share a few stories with you today with the view to maybe exploring a little and hopefully understanding a little bit more about what it is to build a transformational workplace culture. And I'm aspirational when I talk about this stuff, because I think it's important that we have an idea of where we want to be. And I think that at the moment there's a lot that we can be doing that we're not to improve our workplace culture. I was talking to a psychologist earlier on, and I work for a company that is founded by psychologists and a behavioural scientist, which makes it very, talking about having a spotlight on you, we're always having to justify and rationalise. I mean, the name of a company is called Pragmatic thinking, so everything we do is grounded in science. I'm going to reference some of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and of course, Wi-Fi. Where would we be without that? I'm going to share a basic model that I've come up with, and I think it's a nice way to help us understand not only where the evolution of workplace culture is going, but maybe it'll help you understand where your company is or where you are within your company on this evolution. 3 stages. The first stage is a transactional culture. And I'll dig into these a little bit more as we go along. This is where you turn up for work, you get paid, you create something, and then you go home. That's the transaction. You transact or you exchange your time and your skills, your whatever it is you have to contribute to a service, and in turn you get paid money. The next stage of cultural development is where we're transitioning from that transactional exchange into a culture where we start to understand the value of discretionary effort. And finally, this is where we're heading, I'd like to think, into cultures that transform not only the way in which we do business, the people in the business. Because without people in the business, you don't have a business. Culture is not good or bad. It is just what it is. And sometimes we hear about toxic cultures and we hear about bad cultures. I didn't hear Steve Baxter speak this morning, but I understand he talked a bit about culture and the kind of culture he likes to work within. It's not bad, it's just different. And the key, I think, to understanding whether your culture is one that is sustainable, either for you as an employee or for you as a business owner and leader, is to understand whether it is aligned and whether your mission or your purpose, your values, your behaviours, your language, how you show up is aligned. Because if it's not, then you've got a dysfunctional culture. I'm not going to talk about good or bad cultures. I'm going to talk about functional cultures and ones that transform the way in which we do work. And why are we talking about culture? Whilst everything we do is grounded in science, I'm all for the warm fuzzies. I'm a feeler, and I like to accentuate the good vibes at work, but it goes beyond ping pong tables and beanbags and unlimited leave and etc. Some of the things that we associate with culture, modern transformational cultures at the moment. But we do have a problem. Or should I say an opportunity in our workplaces at the moment. Global study done by Gallup. They've been doing this every few years. Most recently, 2018 results, the data shows that 15.9% of people, this is across all industries, across multiple countries, 15.9% of people are actively engaged in the work that they're doing. That's a problem if you're a business owner, because it means that 84% of your people are not engaged. So what the hell are they doing at work if it's not just that transaction of their time for your customers' money? It's a problem. But it's not just a problem in terms of efficiency or productivity it's a problem for us because what about our well-being? What about our emotional, physical well-being? If you're turning up and spending half of your life, we talk about spending a third of your life at work. Most of us spend half of our life, if not at work, engaged in the work that we're doing one way or another. That's costing us. If we're not engaged in that, if we are not being somehow fulfilled or contributing something beyond just our time or our resources, then what a waste. What a waste of that time that is so precious for us. I think our health and our well-being, both mental and physical, emotional, perhaps even spiritual, is a cost that we need to take some more time to understand. I just want to quickly run through each of these stages. Now, your company, your organisation, the one in which you work or the one in which you have founded or are leading, is going to be at one of these stages. Now, I'm not saying one is better than another, but I feel like there is an evolution of stages. Your company will evolve through these stages, and there will be layers upon layers of that evolution as well. But a transactional culture is one where your basic hygiene factors are met. You have clear job description. You get paid well, you get paid fairly. You get annual leave, maternity leave, sick leave, all the fundamental basic needs are being met. You have perhaps some effective and functional communication. It's a pretty basic standard baseline for a healthy workplace culture. Hands up who's willing or game to suggest that this is where their workplace culture sits on that ladder at the moment, or that level. Okay. I'd expect there to be more than that. This is good. This is healthy. The next stage is where we start to transition from the exchange of your time and resources for a paycheck to be something more than that. And this is where we unlock this discretionary effort. This is where your potential and your skills and your talents, Phil DeBella talked a fair bit about this. It's not selling coffee, it's not trading in coffee, it's not a coffee business, it's a people business. And when you get your people right, it's not about getting your people right, but when you help your team understand who they are, what their strengths are, what their skills are, what their talents are, what their potential and capability is, then we start to unlock some real discretionary effort. This is where work becomes not only more enjoyable, but you get something out of this as well as an employee. There's a sense of growth. We know that a sense of growth in your role is one of the greatest drivers for engagement in organisations at the moment. It's interesting, that Gallup poll, that Gallup research that I referenced earlier on, the question was asked to both managers and employees, what is the greatest driver what do you think is the greatest driver of engagement in a workplace? The managers said reward and recognition was the greatest driver for engagement. It's not. It's not. A sense of growth in your role is the most important driver for engagement. And interestingly, the managers had that last on their list as significant drivers for engagement. So this is where we start to unlock some of that discretionary effort within our team. We start talents and skills and not only identify, but we start to build upon those. It's going to go back. Hands up who would like to think that this is the experience they're having at work at the moment. This would be a way in which to describe their workplace culture. Cool. That's awesome. The next stage is where we start to transform, not only as individuals, but as an organisation, as a company, as a business. And each of these photos, actually, that I've shared over the last 3 slides, are photographs taken from an event that I facilitated with colleague Beck at Pragmatic Thinking. And this was a leadership offsite for some leaders in the Australian wine industry. So they're your future leaders of the Australian wine industry right there. And they are a bunch of absolute legends. This experience for them was transformational. Because we weren't talking, yes, we looked at strengths, yes, we looked at talents and capabilities, but we went beyond that. And we started to look at leadership identity. Who are you as a leader? What will you contribute to the future of the Australian wine industry as a future leader? And we went well beyond identifying those talents and strengths. We looked at what those capabilities can translate to in a future that is uncertain. This was a transformational experience, and it wasn't because we were riding dirt bikes around on a muddy track, although it was absolutely the most awesome fun I've had for a long time. But it was transformational because we broke the script. This wasn't on the agenda for the day, but there was a feeling in the room that we needed to get out of the room and go and do something that we hadn't planned to do. And it just was a very liberating experience. A transformational culture is, and I don't distinguish between cultures and workplaces because they are the same, nor will I make a distinction between you as an employee and you in your culture, because you are co-contributing to that culture. You are the workplace culture. And so when we talk about a transformational culture being one where disruption is a feature, where we create something that didn't exist before, where we evolve thinking and products and service beyond the baseline standard that is best practice. We're talking about next practice. This is an evolution of culture, and it's an evolution of business as well. And this is happening at the moment. Now, if you're not thinking about how your culture is mapping your evolution as a business, particularly in technology businesses and software businesses, then you're missing out on an opportunity. This is where we start to unlock potential well beyond what it is that has been identified already. I want to look at this through another lens. If we look at the past and the industrial model as being a transactional model, the outcome is productivity and efficiency. And as I said, this is not a problem. This is I think this is a baseline from where we all need to be working from. The present, I think, now is where we are looking at unlocking engagement and using engagement as a measure for success of a workplace culture. It used to be productivity. Now we're looking at engagement levels and engagement scores. Interestingly, we're not talking about workplace cultures exclusively here either. If you look at that industrial model of businesses from back in the early 1900s, that mapped to how society was organised and arranged as well. It maps to educational institutions, which sadly have not evolved as workplace cultures are evolving. And that is, as an ex-teacher, and seeing and experiencing what it's like to be in a classroom, that hasn't changed a lot since the 40s and 50s. That's a real problem. But I really believe that in order to be relevant in the future as an organisation, we need to be starting to understand what kind of meaning we are creating. As human beings, we are meaning-making machines. It's what we do. Now, as an organisation, if you aren't defining why you do what you do, and if that doesn't align to how you do what you do, and if that's not consistent with your language and your behaviours and your systems and your processes and your beliefs, then you're missing out on a huge opportunity. Now, I'm not talking about being a cult leader and telling everybody what they have to believe in and how they have to believe in it, and how they have to act and behave. But what I am doing is making sure that as an organisation, as a leader, whether it be of a business or maybe as just a leader of a team, or maybe just as a leader of your own behaviour in terms of how you turn up to work, when you start to understand that there is an incredible potential to gather people and align people to something to believe in beyond just the work that you're doing, that's when it gets really interesting. And that's when we start to really transform businesses, organisations, teams, and workplace cultures. So the question is, if we're going to create meaning, what kind of meaning are we going to create? And I don't just want to, it happens a lot, and I've been guilty of doing this, whereby you get up on stage and you hear people talk about create meaning and find your why, and it's all going to be wonderful, and we'll all sort of live in this happy ever after future where everybody's just engaged in work that's, aligned to their purpose. I think it's aspirational, but how the fuck do we do that? How do we do that? I reckon there's 3 things that we can do, and you have to start with something to believe in. If you're turning up to your organisation, to your business, to your workplace, and there isn't a clear, compelling reason for why you're doing what you're doing, then I think there's potential and there's an opportunity to insert some meaning there. If your organisation isn't doing that already, and they're not inspiring you to turn up to contribute to something greater than just the work that you're doing, then there's an opportunity there. There's missed opportunity. And as I said, in the absence of that meaning, we're going to create it ourselves as individuals. And often we'll default to negative biases when it comes to the stories that we're telling. The next thing I think is really important when it comes to creating a transformational culture is to get your story straight. And I talk about alignment in a workplace culture. And alignment is not just having your compelling mission up on the wall, but it's demonstrating that through how you conduct yourself, through how you lead your teams, through how you turn up, and through how you communicate. It needs to be consistent, because if it's not, we are going to call bullshit on you as a leader. We're going to call bullshit on you as an organisation, as a customer. If you say this is what you stand for, and my experience is not aligned to that or is contrary to that, I'm going to call bullshit. And I'm going to go somewhere else. And as a customer, I'm going to go to that organisation, to that company that does what they say they do. Now, I'm not talking about everybody having to have a mission for their culture or their organisation that transforms the planet. Yours could be yours could be to simply give your customer the greatest service in whatever product or service it is that you're delivering. Just do that. If only we can find some alignment with what we say we do and what we do, you're going to build trust. And as a leader, that is the greatest commodity that you will ever have, is the trust of your team and the trust of your customers. And it's so easily undermined by behaviours that are contradictory to what it is that you say you do. Now, this is not just about having a wonderful mission to work to, but it's about having consistency in everything you do. Here's a couple of examples of us working with Virgin to help them transform their safety culture. And what we did was we came up with a story that was consistent, and a story that enabled people to connect with this concept of how we turn up matters in all aspects of their life. Because the fact is that it's what we do when nobody's watching. It's what we do as leaders at all times that is really going to have an impact on the work that we do. And so that consistency of story is essential. The third thing that I can't overstate enough, and something that I believe is underestimated in everything we do is to actually care, and to demonstrate that you care, and to show that you care. Kindness is currency, and it's one that we need more of now. It's one that we have to spend, but we don't, for fear of being rejected or for just fear of vulnerability. But I think this is essential. And it's the great Maya Angelou here, who's depicted in that image, and her quote, I'm sure you've heard of it, that people will remember, or they'll forget what it is that you said, and they'll forget what you did, but they won't forget. And they will remember how you made them feel. And I think this is so important. I've been and worked in workplaces, and I've worked for workplaces, and I've consulted with workplaces who provide the bonuses, who provide all of the bells and whistles for their team, but they don't care enough to know who they are, what their team values and what the team cares about, let alone making any time to connect with them on that level. It is so important. This is Kath Koshal. Does anybody know of Kath Koshal? Show of hands. I reckon you will. Oh, you do. Awesome. I reckon you will one day. Reese Witherspoon has bought the rights to her story, and her production company is going to make a movie of her life. If I had not heard her story firsthand from her, I would not have believed it. This is Kath talking to us at Pragmatic Thinking at our offsite at the start of the year. We had a bit of a 2-day kickoff where we do this every quarter. We get together and we focus on our culture. Because as an organisation that goes into other organisations talking about culture, we've got to get ours right. That's what I'm talking about when it comes to getting your story straight. If we're out championing a transformational culture and we're not living that as an organisation, then quite rightly we should get called bullshit on. So we spent a couple of days at the start of the year, and we do that every quarter. And as I said, most recently we're up in Arnhem Land talking with Graham about his culture. But Kath came and spoke to us, and she told us her story. I really encourage you to write her name down, to Google her, to look it up, and to have a look at what it is that she has experienced in a relatively short time. She's only young, but twice she was told that she wasn't able, that she was not going to be walking again. She almost lost her legs, but after a freak accident, she recovered by sheer willpower and absolute grit and determination to recover. She didn't lose her legs. She regained the ability to walk, and she ended up becoming quite a successful triathlete. And she was training for a triathlon early one morning. She was on a bike in Sydney and was hit from behind by a drunk driver and found herself in hospital being told she'd never walk again, for the second time in the space of a few years. There are so many other things that's happened throughout her story that will just blow your mind. We were all sitting there just bawling, going, how does one person cope, let alone survive and then go on to thrive as a result of these experiences that she's had. She talked about when she was at her lowest point, needing to make a decision whether she would give up or give. And she started to write a list of all the people that have helped her in her life. And starting from the top, there were some surgeons in there that have been incredible at supporting her through these incredible injuries. There were key people in her life. And she started just to write some letters to them. And those letters were letters of gratitude, just to say thank you because that's all she had left was gratitude. And as she started to do this, she started to feel better. I'm going to fast forward a couple of months, and in fact a couple of years to where she is now. Kindness became her way of transforming, kindness and gratitude became her way of transforming from the depths of despair and at a point where she was considering taking her own life. Kindness and gratitude transformed her, and not only her, but to this date, more than 200,000 people only just through this website that she created. It's not just a website, it's a movement. The Kindness Factory, her mission is for people to log their acts of kindness and share with others what it is that they're doing to bring kindness to workplaces, to lives and to relationships. She is an absolute legend and a perfect example of how we can use kindness to transform ourselves, the people we work with, and she's transformed me and my experience of work and why I do what I do. There's some phenomenal stories there, and I encourage you to look her up. This is why we do what we do at Pragmatic Thinking. We have a mission to make a difference to the difference makers. This is a group called Somerville up in Darwin, and we spent the day donating our time and whatever we could to this organisation. They're a disability services organisation or disability support organisation up in Darwin, and they look after and care for in-house 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, people who can't care for themselves. incredible organisation. And in terms of culture, there's not a lot that we can add as advisors to them and what they do, because they absolutely nail it. Their reason why they do what they do is compelling. Their story that they tell, how they communicate with each other, how they communicate with the respect that these carers have for their clients was mind-blowing. Again, this was an experience of just seeing that in action that transformed me. This is how we transform cultures, through having a compelling reason beyond yourself for why you do what you do, getting that story straight and making sure it's consistent. And in terms of kindness, there isn't an organisation I've seen that lives that kindness more than these guys do. I'm going to finish off with just another lens through which we can look at this. You might be thinking, that's great, but what can I do? If we take this model and we put ourselves in the middle instead of our organisation. Now, this might map to your work life, this might map to your personal life, but I encourage you to think about where you sit on this evolution of transformation at the moment. Are you focused on yourself and what you can get? Are you focused on the group and your people that you relate with, whether that be family, friends, work colleagues, clients, customers, and what you can share? I believe that now we have an opportunity and a responsibility to go beyond ourselves and beyond just the organisations in which we work, and think about what we can contribute to humanity on a global scale. Because unless we do, again, we're missing out on an incredible opportunity and to give. Because when we give, we have an impact we're having an impact on each other regardless. I encourage you to consider what that impact is, and through kindness, perhaps you can have an impact that will be remembered, that will have some longevity, that will actually transform somebody's life. And never underestimate how powerful a simple act of kindness can be. A word, a text message, and I encourage you to do that this afternoon if you have time. Spend a minute. Go to your contacts list. Think about that person who might need to hear from you, and send them a message that says, hey, I'm just thinking about you. I'm so grateful that you're in my life. I love you. And leave it at that. That transforms the experience. Somebody who cares about you, who you care about, it transforms their experience today. This is us, again, a month ago, looking at some of the most mind-blowing artwork. Every one of these hands up there were making a contribution to their culture, making a statement, saying, this is me, this is who I am, this is where I belong. I encourage you to make a statement in the organisations in which you work, and I hope that it is one that is defined by kindness. Thank you.